World Super Police is a game that flew under the radar when it was released for the PlayStation 2 in 2004. Developed by Mebius, a lesser-known Japanese studio, the game was marketed as a budget title, a factor that contributed to its obscurity. Despite the modest expectations that usually accompany such releases, World Super Police managed to stand out, if not for its quality, then certainly for its peculiar combination of genres and its curious design choices. Mebius, the developer behind World Super Police, is known for creating a variety of niche and lesser-known titles. One of their more notable releases is Steel Savior, 2004, a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up for the PlayStation 2, which showcased their affinity for blending classic gameplay with modern elements. They also developed Ucha Nostalgia, 2004, an adventure game based on the anime Stelvia of the universe. While their games often featured unique concepts, Mebius struggled to achieve mainstream success, largely producing games that appeal to specific audiences rather than the broader market. Mebius was not a household name in the gaming world, even in Japan, where they were based. The studio had a modest portfolio, often focusing on smaller, niche titles rather than blockbuster hits. World Super Police is emblematic of this approach, representing a type of game that might be more experimental or risky, which larger studios would typically shy away from. Mebius's decision to create a game that blends elements of real-time strategy with high-octane vehicular action is reflective of this experimental mindset. They aim to carve out a unique niche in the gaming market by appealing to fans of both genres. However, this ambition was not fully realized, as the final product struggled to balance its disparate gameplay elements effectively. From the outset, World Super Police was designed as a budget title, which meant it was sold at a lower price point than mainstream releases. This pricing strategy is often a double-edged sword. While it can attract players looking for an affordable gaming experience, it also tends to signal lower production values. In the case of World Super Police, this was quite evident in several aspects of the game. From its simplistic graphics to its underwhelming audio design, the game's budget nature was most apparent in its presentation. While the PlayStation 2 was capable of producing impressive visuals for its time, World Super Police featured an art style that could best be described as functional, but unremarkable. The environments were sparse, the vehicle models were simplistic, and the animations were stiff. This lack of visual flair made it difficult for the game to stand out in a crowded market, especially when competing against more polished titles.
The most intriguing aspect of World Super Police is undoubtedly its gameplay, which attempts to fuse two very different genres, real-time strategy and vehicular combat, similar to the classic arcade game Chase HQ. This hybrid approach is uncommon in the gaming world, making World Super Police something of a curiosity. In the game, players take on the role of an officer in an elite global police force tasked with bringing down criminals in high-speed chases. The core of the gameplay revolves around driving, with players pursuing criminals in a variety of vehicles, trying to ram them off the road or disable their cars in some other fashion. This aspect of the game is where the Chase HQ influence is most evident, as the mechanics mirror the fast-paced, arcade-style action of that classic game. However, World Super Police attempts to differentiate itself by incorporating RTS elements into this formula. Between missions, players are required to manage their police force, allocate resources, and make strategic decisions that influence the outcome of future chases. In theory, this blend of strategy and action could have provided a unique and engaging experience. Unfortunately, the execution left much to be desired. The art style of World Super Police can best be described as functional, lacking the creative spark that characterizes more memorable titles. The game's visual design is firmly rooted in realism, but it doesn't push the PlayStation 2's capabilities in any meaningful way. The environments are largely repetitive, consisting of drab cityscapes and unremarkable rural areas, with few distinguishing features to set them apart. Vehicle models, while accurate enough to convey the types of cars and trucks you're driving or chasing, are similarly devoid of detail. The textures are flat, and the animations, particularly during crashes or high-speed collisions, are underwhelming. The game's overall aesthetic is utilitarian, serving the gameplay without adding much in the way of atmosphere or immersion. Even the user interface and menus are basic, with little in the way of flair or personality. This bare-bones approach might have been a deliberate choice by the developers to keep the game's budget under control. but it comes at the cost of making World Super Police feel generic and forgettable.
One of the most significant issues with World Super Police is that the RTS elements feel inconsequential, both to the gameplay and the overall experience. While the idea of managing a global police force and making strategic decisions sounds appealing on paper, the implementation is shallow and lacks depth. The decisions you make between missions have little noticeable impact on the game's outcome, making the strategy component feel more like an obligatory addition rather than a core feature. The RTS mechanics are largely confined to a series of menu-based interactions, where players can choose which vehicles to deploy, assign officers to different tasks, and manage resources such as fuel and ammunition. However, these choices rarely influence the action-packed chase sequences, which form the bulk of the gameplay. As a result, the RTS elements come across as tacked on, failing to integrate meaningfully with the rest of the game. This lack of integration is a significant missed opportunity, as a more robust strategy layer could have added a lot to the game's replayability and depth. Instead, the RTS elements feel like a distraction, something you have to get through before getting back to the real action. In keeping with its budget nature, World Super Police also features a story that is almost entirely forgettable. The narrative, such as it is, involves a shadowy criminal organization that must be brought to justice by the titular World Super Police. However, the story is delivered through minimal cutscenes and sparse dialogue, leaving little room for character development or plot twists. The game's thin story is mirrored by the equally sparse characterization. The player's role as a police officer is largely faceless, with little in the way of personality or a motivation provided for the actions you take. This lack of narrative engagement further contributes to the sense that World Super Police is a game more focused on its mechanics than on delivering a compelling story or immersive world. World Super Police is a curious footnote in the PlayStation 2's extensive library, a game that tried to do something different but ultimately fell short of its ambitions. The blend of RTS and vehicular combat could have made for a unique and engaging experience, but the game's budget constraints and lack of cohesive design prevented it from reaching its potential. For those interested in obscure or experimental games, World Super Police might still hold some appeal, if only as a curiosity. However, for most players, it's likely to be remembered, if at all, as a budget title that couldn't quite live up to its intriguing premise.
This is justice!